The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, moaning through the cottonwoods and rattling the loose boards of the barn. It was a kind of night that drove most men to whiskey or prayer, and Eli Mercer had run out of both. He sat at his table by a dying lamp, a rough hand cupped around the flame, watching it dance against a cracked window pane. The world outside was a white blur of snow and silence. Inside, only the ticking of the old clock kept him company, a heartbeat in a house that had forgotten how to feel alive. He hadn't spoken to another soul in near 3 weeks, unless a horse counted. Not since he buried Mary and the child behind the ridge. The small cross there still leaned crooked in the wind, half swallowed by drifts. Sometimes, when the nights were long and the whiskey low, Eli thought he could still hear her voice in the wind, soft, like she was calling him in for supper. But tonight the wind spoke of something else. Trouble, maybe, or change. The horses were restless. He heard them shifting in the barn, hooves stamping against frozen dirt. It wasn't their usual rhythm. Eli rose from the chair, grabbed the rifle prop by the door, and pulled on his coat. The boards creaked under his boots as he stepped out into the storm. Snow slapped his face, sharp and wet, and his breath rose like smoke. The lantern flame bent sideways in a gust, throwing shards of light across the yard. Halfway to the barn, he stopped. There it was faint but real, a whisper of movement. Not the sound of animals, but people. Eli's heart gave a slow, deliberate thump. He cocked the hammer back on the rifle and pushed open the barn door with the toe of his boot. At first, he thought the cold had conjured ghosts. 3 shapes huddled in the hay, wrapped in torn blankets and gunny sacks, faces half hidden. A faint glow from the lantern showed pale skin, trembling hands, and fear. The nearest one, a woman with tangled hair and a bruise darkening her jaw, sat up too quickly. Her eyes were wide, desperate. "Please," she said, her voice cracking like thin ice. "Please, don't shoot." Eli said nothing. He stepped closer, the lantern's light climbing up her face. Behind her, another woman stirred, older, her cheeks hollow from hunger. A third figure coughed weakly, barely conscious. The smell of damp wool and sickness filled the air. "What in God's name are you doing in my barn?" he asked. His voice came out low, worn, the voice of a man who hadn't needed company for a long time. The older woman lifted her chin, proud despite the shaking in her hands. "We mean no harm, sir. We were on our way to Laramie. The stagecoach was attacked 2 days past. Bandits took everything. We've been walking since." Eli's jaw tightened. "There's no road to Laramie in that direction." She nodded once. "We know that now." The younger woman beside her, maybe 19, maybe less, tried to stand but collapsed back into the hay. Fever had her sweating even in the cold. The first woman, he guessed she was around 27, moved to comfort her, pressing a cloth to her forehead. There was something steady in the way she did it. Not panic, just resolve. Eli lowered his rifle, but only a fraction. "You shouldn't have come this far. You'll freeze before dawn." The younger one whispered something. The woman looked up again. "We didn't have a choice." He studied her in the lantern light. The curve of her face under the dirt, the torn hem of her dress, the way her fingers trembled but never stopped caring for the sick girl. He saw no deception there, just weariness and fear. But fear could be dangerous too. "You can stay," he said finally, voice rough as gravel. "Till morning." The relief in her eyes was small but deep. She nodded once, like a soldier taking orders. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer," he said. "Eli Mercer." "I'm Clara." "That's Martha and Sophie." She gestured to the others. "We'll stay out of your way." Eli said nothing more. He fetched an extra blanket from the tack room, tossed it toward them, and left without looking back. But as he crossed the yard again, the sound of the wind seemed different, less empty, almost watchful. He didn't like that feeling. Inside the cabin, he poured the last of his coffee and stared at the fire. He told himself he'd turn them out come morning. He had enough mouths to feed under the soil already. But somewhere between the ticking of the clock and the sighing of the wind, his eyes drifted shut. When he woke, dawn had not yet broken. The wind had risen to a howl, and snow slapped against the windows hard enough to shake them. He went to the door and pushed it open. The yard was nearly buried. The storm had doubled back. He cursed under his breath, grabbed his coat, and trudged to the barn again. The sight that met him stopped him cold. Clara was standing near the stall, sleeves rolled to her elbows, pitching hay like she'd been born to it. Martha was tending the fire pit they'd built from an old metal trough, coaxing a weak flame from damp wood. Sophie lay on a bed of blankets, her face pale, breath shallow. Eli stepped in, brushing snow from his shoulders. "You were supposed to leave." Clara didn't stop working. "We tried," she said, nodding toward the swirling white outside. "The storm had other plans." He grunted. "You'll all die out here if you keep pushing like that." "Then we'll die together," Martha said softly. "We've come too far to turn back." He couldn't argue with that. The truth was, he saw something in their eyes he hadn't seen in months, a stubborn will to live. It made him uneasy, reminded him of Mary. She'd been that way too. Quiet strength under soft eyes. A sudden crash broke the thought. The horses were spooked. One of the big bays had broken its lead and was thrashing near the back. Eli dropped his rifle and moved fast, grabbing for the halter rope. Clara was there before he could stop her. "Stay back," he barked. She ignored him, stepping into the stall, her voice calm and low. "Easy, boy. Easy now." The horse slowed, nostrils flaring, eyes wide. She laid a hand on its neck, murmuring something he couldn't catch. Within seconds, the animal stilled. Eli stared at her, breathing hard. "You've handled stock before." "My pa raised horses back in Missouri," she said, brushing hair from her face. "Before the war took him." Their eyes met for a heartbeat too long. Then she turned away, picking up a stray rope. He repaired the broken gate in silence while she tended to Sophie, melting snow for water, wrapping her tighter in blankets. Martha hummed softly under her breath. "An Oldham, maybe." The sound filled the barn like a fragile thread of hope. Hours passed. The storm worsened, hammering against the walls. Eli brought in extra wood, and what little food he could spare, beans, jerky, half a loaf of bread. He told himself it was practical. Letting them die here would only make more ghosts to haunt him. As dusk fell, the light inside the barn turned amber and soft. The fire snapped, throwing long shadows across the hay. Eli sat apart from them, back against a post, listening to their quiet voices. Clara was telling Martha about a river crossing they'd made 2 days before, the ice breaking beneath their wagon, the horses screaming, the cold water dragging them down. Her voice didn't tremble once. When she finished, she noticed Eli watching. "You don't talk much, Mr. Mercer." "Nothing worth saying." "Maybe not," she said, almost smiling. "But silence can be heavy, too." He looked away. "You've got a sharp tongue for a guest in my barn." "Guess I've had to." The wind outside screamed, but for the first time in months, Eli didn't feel entirely alone. He studied the fire until his eyes blurred, seeing shapes there, Mary's face, the child's small hands, the grave cross behind the ridge. The ache inside him pressed harder, but he didn't push it away. Clara moved closer to check on the pot of beans, her shadow flickering over him. "You've lost someone," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He swallowed hard. "Everyone loses someone out here." "That's true," she said, "but not everyone keeps living after." He didn't answer. Couldn't. The truth of it burned too close. Later, when the women had settled down to sleep, Eli stayed awake, rifle across his knees, listening to the wind. He could hear their breathing, soft, even alive. Something about that sound settled the hollow inside his chest. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or maybe it was a faint reminder of what life used to be. The fire burned low. Clara stirred once in her sleep, murmuring a name he couldn't make out. Her face, in the flickering light, looked peaceful for the first time. He wondered what kind of pain she carried that could drive her through storms and bandits to end up here, in a stranger's barn. He wondered what it said about him that he'd let her stay. He shifted his weight, the rifle creaking softly in his hands. Snow filtered through the cracks in the roof, glinting like ash. Outside, the wind eased a little, its voice no longer angry but tired, almost human. Eli looked around the barn, the sleeping women, the dozing horses, the quiet fire, and felt something stir he thought had died with Mary. Not love, not yet, just a faint pulse of purpose. He whispered to himself, the words half a prayer, half a warning. Sunrise, Mercer. You send them off come sunrise. But even as he said it, he knew he wouldn't. The night stretched long and silent. The storm moved north, leaving the world hushed under new snow. In the dim orange light, Eli's eyes grew heavy. His head sank against the post. The last thing he saw before sleep took him was Clara, her face soft in the glow, one hand resting protectively on the sick girl beside her. The fire crackled low, and for the first time since winter took everything from him, Eli Mercer felt the weight of loneliness ease. The wind slipped through the gaps in the boards, gentle now, like a lullaby. And in that quiet barn, where grief and strangers share the same fragile warmth, something unseen began to change. When morning came, the world would still be cold, the snow deep, the dangers real. But there, among the horses in the drifting light, Mercy had found its way home. Be wide dawn the storm had blown itself weary, leaving the valley buried in white silence. The barn roof sagged under a crust of snow, and the skies stretched pale and brittle as glass. Eli Mercer stepped out into the yard, boots crunching through the frost. Smoke from the chimney drifted straight up, the first calm breath in days. He felt it in his bones. This uneasy peace never lasted long. Out here it never did. Inside the barn, warmth and the smell of coffee waited. Clara stood by the fire pit they built from a broken trough. Sleeves rolled up, hair loose from its braid. The faintest color had returned to her cheeks. She glanced at him as he entered, her eyes catching the light like amber glass. "Morning, Mr. Mercer." He nodded, pulling off his gloves. "How's the girl?" Still weak, but breathing easier. Clara looked toward Sophie, who slept bundled under 2 blankets. "She's young. That helps." Martha ladled coffee into a tin cup and handed it to Eli. "Thank you for letting us stay. We'll move on once the road clears." He grunted, sipping. The coffee was bitter and thin, but it beat snowmelt. "Where will you go?" "The next town's 30 miles south, and the trail's half buried." Martha's jaw tightened. "We'll manage." "We always do." Eli studied her, 40, maybe more, face marked by hardship but still proud. These women had no business surviving what they already had. Yet somehow they were still standing. He respected that, though he didn't say so. Clara busied herself with the pot, stirring the beans they'd stretched from last night's meal. He caught her glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking. It wasn't fear now, but something closer to curiosity. He wondered what she saw, a man half ghosted by grief, living on stubbornness and silence. The morning passed slow. Sophie woke, coughing but alive, her eyes clearer than before. Martha helped her sip water, while Clara mended one of Eli's torn saddle blankets with careful, practiced stitches. The sight unsettled him. A woman's touch had been gone from this place too long. Near midday, the crunch of hooves broke the stillness. Eli froze. No one rode this far north unless they had a reason. He went to the door, rifle already in his hands. Through the glare of sun on snow, a single rider approached. Tall, wrapped in a duster coat, hat low over his eyes. The man dismounted slow, his movements deliberate. He had the cold, polished look of a bounty hunter. Eli knew the type. He'd been one once. Before the war took that part of him. The stranger tipped his hat. "Name's Silas Quinn. I'm looking for 3 missing women." Eli didn't lower the rifle. "You found a lot of land to search. What makes you think they're here?" Silas smiled without warmth. "Stage out of Cheyenne went missing 4 days ago. Driver turned up dead 2 miles from here. Folks said 3 brides were on board, headed for Laramie. Pretty ones. Desperate ones. Sound familiar?" Eli's heartbeat slowed to a heavy thud. He could feel Clara's eyes on his back. "Haven't seen a soul since the snow came down," he said. Silas studied him, lips twitching around a cigarette. "Mind if I take a look in that barn?" "I do mind." Eli's voice was calm, but the edge in it was steel. "Ain't nothing in there but horses and hard work." Silas took a long drag, exhaled smoke that twisted in the cold. You've got the look of a man who don't lie. Easy, Mercer. Word is, you used to run with the Union Scouts out near Red Fork. Men like you don't forget how to kill. Eli didn't blink. And men like you don't forget how to push their luck. For a moment, neither moved. The only sound was the wind scraping across the yard. Then Silas smiled again, too wide. If you see 'em, tell the girls their grooms are waiting. And those grooms ain't patient men. He flicked his cigarette into the snow, mounted up, and rode off, leaving only hoof prints and unease behind. Eli waited until the rider was out of sight before lowering the rifle. He turned toward the barn. Clara stood in the doorway, pale but steady. "You shouldn't have lied for us," she said softly. "He'll be back." Eli holstered the gun. "Then we best be ready." That night, the wind carried no storm, but the air was thick with something heavier. Fear, maybe, or fate drawing its breath. Clara sat near the fire, sewing a tear in Sophie's shawl. Martha was grinding herbs she'd found in her satchel, muttering prayers under her breath. Eli worked at cleaning the rifle, though his hands were slower than usual. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "You might as well tell me the truth. That man wasn't after you for nothing." Martha looked up, her eyes tired. "We were promised to men in Laramie. Paid for like cattle. A broker arranged it, so we'd be cared for, given homes. But he lied. One of the men, he wasn't right, mean as a rattler." Clara's needle paused. "He tried to take Sophie before we ever reached town. I stopped him." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Stopped him how?" She met his gaze square. "With his own gun." The barn went quiet. The fire cracked, throwing shadows across her face. Half angel, half outlaw. She looked unflinching, though her hands trembled now. "We buried him by the river. The broker said no law would listen to our side, so we ran." Eli leaned back, exhaling slow. He'd seen enough of frontier law to know she was right. Out here, truth mattered less than who held the gun. "You're safer now," he said finally. "But Quinn's no fool. He'll come back with others." Clara nodded. "We won't cause you trouble. We'll leave before first light." He shook his head. "You leave in this snow, you'll last 2 miles at best. No use dying for pride." Their eyes met again, the air between them alive with something unspoken. Trust, maybe, or the start of it. By the time night deepened, the cold had crept into every corner. Eli threw more wood on the fire, the glow painting the rafters in gold and shadow. Martha and Sophie slept early, worn thin. Clara lingered by the doorway, staring out into the moonlit yard. "You could have turned us in," she said quietly. "No one would have blamed you." Eli took a slow sip from his flask. "Ain't my way." "Why?" He shrugged. "Guess I got tired of burying people the world didn't care about." She looked at him then, really looked, and something softened in her face. "You lost someone." He nodded once. "Wife, child. Winter took 'em both." She stepped closer, the firelight catching the faint bruise still shadowing her jaw. "Then you know what it's like to watch everything you love turn to dust." Eli set the flask aside. "That's why you fight to keep what's left." Before either could speak again, a sound cracked the night, a sharp report, with splintering near the door. Then another, gunfire. Eli moved fast, shoving Clara down behind a hay bale. "Stay low." He snatched the rifle, peering through a gap in the wall. 3 figures moved outside, ghost-like in the snow. Silas Quinn's voice called out, mocking, "Told you I'd be back, Mercer. Hand 'em over, and maybe I'll leave you breathing." Eli fired once. The first shot hit a post, splintering with inches from a man's shoulder. Another shot answered, grazing Eli's arm. He hissed, ducking back. The women screamed. Clara crawled to him, grabbing a spare rifle from the wall. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned steady. "Tell me what to do." "Keep your head down and wait." "No." She cocked the hammer with a click. "You need another gun." There was no time to argue. The next volley tore through the door. Sparks jumped from the stove, lighting the air with heat and smoke. Eli leaned out, fired twice more. One man fell, cursing. The others retreated behind the corral fence. Snow and gunpowder filled the air, each breath raw in his lungs. Eli's shoulder throbbed where a bullet grazed him, blood seeping through his sleeve. Clara slid next to him, firing once. The recoil nearly knocked her back, but her aim was true, would splinter where a figure had been hiding. Good, Eli muttered. Keep him guessing. Minutes passed like hours. Then silence. The men were gone, retreated into the trees. But they'd be back. Eli slumped against the wall, breathing hard. Clara tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it to his wound. Her touch was firm, unflinching. "You're bleeding too much," she said. "Had worse." She frowned. "You shouldn't make light of it." He almost smiled. "Ain't making light. Just been reminded I'm still alive." Her hand stilled. Their eyes met in the flickering light. For a moment, the world outside vanished. Just the two of them, bruised and breathing, bound by something neither wanted to name. Sophie whimpered in her sleep, breaking the spell. Clara pulled back, busying herself with a bandage. "They'll come again," she said. "He won't stop." Eli nodded. "Then we don't wait for him." "What do you mean?" "We move first. At first light, I'll ride into Sage Creek. There's a telegraph station. Maybe I can get word to the marshal." "And leave us here alone?" He hesitated. "You'll be safer if I—" "Don't," she said, her voice sharp. "You've already done enough." Eli saw the fear beneath her anger, the memory of men who'd promised help before and brought ruin instead. He softened his tone. "I'll be back by midday. I give you my word." She studied him, then nodded once. "Your word's worth something, Mr. Mercer. I can feel it." Outside, the wind had died. Snow glowed faint under the moon, silvering the world. Inside, the fire burned low, throwing warmth across their faces. Eli felt exhaustion pulling at him, but behind it was a strange steadiness, as if the night's violence had carved something clear inside him. Clara finished tying the bandage and sat back. "You shouldn't have risked yourself for us." He looked at her, voice quiet. "Wasn't a choice." Martha stirred, opening one eye. "Ain't many men left like you, Mr. Mercer," she murmured. "Maybe that's why the Lord sent us here." Eli said nothing. He didn't believe much in Providence these days. But as he watched Clara tend the fire, her face soft with weariness and light, he wondered if the old woman might be right. Later, when the barn had gone still again, Eli stood in the doorway, watching the horizon. Somewhere out there, Quinn was waiting, licking his wounds. This wasn't over. But he felt no fear, only resolve. Behind him, Clara's voice came softly, almost like a prayer. "You think we'll live through this?" He turned, a shadow in the lantern glow. "We will, so long as we don't quit." She smiled faintly, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Then we won't." The fire snapped once, sparks rising into the dark. The snow outside gleamed, untouched and pure, hiding the tracks of the dead beneath its quiet surface. Eli closed the door and set the bolt, sealing them in against the cold. The women slept again before dawn, huddled together for warmth. Eli stayed awake, rifle across his knees, watching the embers fade. The pain in his arm throbbed steady, but his mind was clear. Something had shifted between them all, an understanding, forged in danger. When morning came, he would ride out into a world that wanted them gone. But for now, in the hush between breaths, the barn felt almost like home again. He looked at Clara one last time before the light broke. She slept with her hand resting near his bandaged arm, as if guarding it even in dreams. The thought drew a tired smile from him. Outside, the first pale streaks of dawn cut across the snow. The day would bring blood, or hope, or both. But as Eli Mercer reached for his hat and whispered a prayer he hadn't said in years, he found he didn't mind either way. For the first time since death came to his door, he had something left worth fighting for. Under the bruised sky of late afternoon, the ranch lay quiet, too quiet. The air hung heavy with dust and dread, as though the land itself held its breath. Luke Carter stood on the porch of his weather house, shotgun resting against his thigh, eyes fixed on the horizon where a plume of dust twisted upward. It wasn't the wind raising that cloud. He knew the sight too well. Horsemen, armed and coming fast. The news had traveled faster than he'd hoped. McGraw's men knew about the brides. They knew Luke had interfered, hiding women meant for a buyer who dealt in deception and ruin. He'd taken in 3 desperate souls, and now the price of that mercy was riding toward his ranch in a storm of hooves and hate. Behind him, the door creaked open. "They're coming, ain't they?" Sarah's voice was steady, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Her fingers twisted around the edge of her apron, the fabric damp with sweat and flour. Luke turned, his jaw tightening. "They'll be here before sundown." Mary appeared next, clutching a rifle longer than her arm, face pale but resolute. "You said you used to know McGraw." "Knew him too well," Luke said grimly. "Rode under him once, till I learned what kind of man he was." "And now he's coming for us," Sarah said softly. Luke looked past them, to the barn where the 3rd bride, young Emily, was tending to horses, her hair whipping like fire in the wind. "He's coming for what he thinks belongs to him," Luke said, "and I aim to show him he's wrong." The sound of distant thunder grew closer, hooves drumming like war drums, dust curling into the dying light. Luke loaded his shotgun. The metallic clicked sharp and final. "You girls stay inside. Bolt the doors, bar the windows, and don't open for nobody but me." Sarah stepped forward. "We can't just hide." He met her gaze. "This ain't your fight." Her eyes flashed with something between fear and defiance. "You made it our fight when you let us stay." Luke hesitated, something soft flickering in his chest. He'd seen courage before on battlefields in the faces of dying men, but never like this. "Then you'd best know how to shoot," he muttered. The 3 of them moved fast. Mary gathered ammunition. Emily fetched water. Sarah steadied her hands and loaded the rifle. The wind kicked up dust that stung their eyes, and the sun began to sink like a dying ember behind the mountains. When the riders came into view, 6 of them, maybe 7, they rode with rifles across their saddles and greed burning in their eyes. McGraw led the pack, his black duster snapping the wind, a grin carved into his weathered face. "Carter," he hollered, reining up near the fence line. "You got something that don't belong to you." Luke stepped off the porch, every step measured. "Last I checked, people ain't property." McGraw laughed, a sound like gravel grinding. "Funny how you start caring about right and wrong after you quit riding with me." "I quit 'cause I got tired of filth like you." McGraw's smile faded. "You took what was mine, Luke. 3 women I paid good money for. Then you paid for a lie. They ain't for sale." McGraw leaned forward in his saddle, eyes glinting. "Then I'll just take 'em back." He snapped his fingers, and the men behind him spread out, circling the ranch. Luke raised his shotgun. "You'll cross that fence, you'll die on it." McGraw smirked. "You always were stubborn. Stubborn's what's kept me alive." The first shot cracked the silence. Luke dug behind the water trough as splinters exploded from the porch post. He returned fire, the recoil jolting through his shoulder. The air filled with smoke and thunder, rifle fire echoing across the valley, horses screaming in panic. Inside the house, Sarah crouched near the window, eyes wide. "He's outnumbered." Mary gritted her teeth, fired through the crack shutter, and dropped one of McGraw's men clean off his horse. "Not if we got bullets left." Luke reloaded, breath ragged. 2 men down, but McGraw's men kept pressing forward, their silhouettes flitting through the dusk like specters. Then he heard it, a scream from the barn. "Emily!" Luke's heart dropped. He bolted across the yard, bullets kicking up dirt at his heels. He threw open the barn door to see one of McGraw's men grabbing Emily, dragging her toward the open field. Luke fired without thinking. The man fell dead before he hit the ground. Emily sobbed, trembling. "You hurt?" he asked, grabbing her shoulders. She shook her head, eyes wide with shock. No, but he—" "Get inside. Now!" She ran, and Luke turned, shotgun ready. McGraw was coming, alone now, riding hard and fast, his pistol flashing in the fading light. Luke fired. The shot grazed McGraw's arm, but the man kept coming, teeth bared in fury. He leapt from his horse and tackled Luke into the dirt. The shotgun flew from his hands. Fist met flesh, raw, brutal. Dust filled their mouths. McGraw slammed Luke against the ground, fingers closing around his throat. "You think you can take what's mine?" McGraw hissed. Luke choked out, "They ain't yours." He drove his knee up, forcing McGraw back just enough to grab a rock. He swung hard. McGraw's head snapped sideways. Blood splattered across the dirt. The outlaw staggered, drew his pistol. Luke lunged, wrestling for it. The gun went off, once, twice, both of them grunting in pain. Then McGraw froze, eyes wide, looking down at the growing red bloom on his chest. Luke's hand still gripped the gun. McGraw stumbled back, mouth twisting in disbelief. "You should have stayed out of my way." He collapsed. The echo of the gunshot rolled across the valley like a dying breath. Luke stood there for a long moment, chest heaving, the smell of gunpowder and blood thick in the air. The world felt still again, but not peaceful, just quiet, heavy. From the porch, Sarah's voice broke the silence. "Luke!" He turned. She was standing there, rifle still in hand, her face pale but her eyes fierce. Behind her, Mary and Emily hovered in the doorway, afraid to move closer. "It's over," he said hoarsely. "He won't be coming back." Sarah's gaze drifted to McGraw's body, then to Luke's bloodied hands. "And what about you?" Luke looked down. His shirt was torn, streaked with blood, his and McGraw's both. "I'll live," he muttered, "if the Lord's willing." They buried McGraw on the far edge of the property, where the grass grew high and the wind never stopped moving. Luke said no words over him. Some men didn't earn them. When the sun rose the next morning, light spilled across the valley like forgiveness trying to find its way through. The women sat around the kitchen table, quiet but breathing easier, the fear beginning to fade from their faces. Luke stood by the window, watching the horses graze near the fence line. For the first time in years, the land didn't feel like a tomb. Mary was the first to speak. "We can leave today, can't we? The stage to Denver." "You could," Luke said softly, "but you don't have to." Sarah glanced up. "What do you mean?" He turned, eyes meeting hers. "This place, it's more than just dirt and fences. It's a chance. For all of us." Mary smiled faintly. "You offering us a job, Mr. Carter?" He smiled back, faintly, "Maybe more than that." Emily blushed, pretending to busy herself with the dishes. Sarah, though, held his gaze. "You're saying we stay." "I'm saying you don't owe me a thing," Luke said. "But if you want to build something here, something real, you've got my hand in it." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her eyes soft but searching. "You've lost a lot, haven't you?" "Everything that mattered," he said quietly, "till you all came along." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away quickly. "Then maybe the Lord sent us for a reason." He nodded, voice low. "Maybe he did." The days that followed were slow but steady. They mended fences, rebuilt the barn doors, and cleaned the house until it smelled with smoke and fresh bread instead of fear. The land seemed to breathe again, like it, too, had survived the storm. Luke worked beside Sarah more often than not, repairing saddles, tending the cattle, sharing quiet meals under the open sky. The others noticed the way he looked at her, the way she looked back. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Luke stood near the corral, hat in hand. Sarah approached, her dress brushing the dust. "You've been quiet today," she said softly. "Been thinking? About?" He glanced at her, eyes shallow but warm. "About what a man does after he's had a second chance." "And what's your answer?" He hesitated. "Maybe he stops running. Maybe he builds a life worth keeping." She smiled faintly. "Sounds like a fine idea." He stepped closer. The air between them felt charged, like the stillness before rain. "Sarah, I ain't much good with words, but I'd be honored if you'd stay. Not as a guest. Not as a hand. As my wife." Her breath caught. "You mean that?" He nodded. "I lost my first to fever. Thought I'd buried my heart with her. But you brought something back I didn't think I'd ever feel again." Tears welled in her eyes. "You sure you want a woman who came here running from her past?" He smiled, slow and sure. Seems to me we all came here running from something. But maybe we can stop running together." She reached out, her fingers trembling as they found his. "Then yes, Luke Carter, I'll stay." The night fell around them, cool and still, the stars burning bright over the endless prairie. From the porch, Mary and Emily watched, grinning through tears. Luke kissed Sarah beneath the fading light, the world narrowing to just the two of them, the widow and the rancher both broken, both brave enough to love again. When dawn broke the next day, they were wet under the cottonwood tree near the creek. No preacher, no choir, just the wind, the whisper of water, and the promise of something new. The ranch had known blood and sorrow, but now it knew laughter, and maybe, somewhere beyond the hills, the ghosts of the past finally rested easy. Because out there on the frontier, where loss was common and love was rare, one man had found 3 women sleeping in his barn, and married hope before dusk.